When you think of the Olympics, what comes to mind? The flags, the medals, the unforgettable moments of victory. For most of us, the Games represent something pure, the ultimate stage where dreams come true and nations come together. But what if I told you that beneath the shining surface lies a darker truth, one built on exploitation's silence and suffering? Because behind every gold medal, there's a story most people never hear, and tonight, we're going to talk about them. This isn't just a story about sports. It's a story about power pain and the people the Olympic spotlight left behind. Welcome to True Crime Echoes. Chapter 1. The thought that changed everything. I had this random thought the other day. It wasn't anything profound at first. I was just sitting on the toilet. I know, classy. But honestly, that's when some of my best thinking happens. Like no distractions, just me and my thoughts. Anyway, I was sitting there and I started thinking about the Olympics. Yeah, the Olympics. And I thought, what if the people competing weren't elite athletes? Like, what if instead of Michael Phelps or Simone Biles, we had, I don't know, Todd from across the street. You know, Todd. He's nice, always waves, but he's got a little beer belly going on, smokes like a chimney, and probably hasn't run since high school gym class. What if he suddenly got a letter in the mail that said, "Congratulations. You've been selected to represent your country in the 100-meter sprint." Wouldn't that be wild? Or, like, imagine your sweet old grandma. She's just there in the kitchen baking cookies 1 minute, and the next, she's got to throw a javelin in front of a global audience. I mean, picture it, her Todd, and then some random CrossFit queen who deadlifts trucks on the weekends. All in the same lineup, competing on TV for gold. At first, I was laughing to myself. It felt like a twisted version of the Hunger Games, but for sports. But then the idea kind of stuck with me. Like, why do we only see the best of the best? The most perfect bodies, the fastest times, the strongest humans. And more importantly, who decided that's who the Olympics were for? So later that night, like 2 in the morning, because I can't ever sleep, I went down a Google rabbit hole. You know the kind. 1 minute you're looking up, can pigeons recognize human faces? And the next you're reading about ancient Greece and naked men wrestling in olive oil? It escalates quickly. But what I found that night blew my mind. Did you know that about 2,000 years ago, the Olympics were wildly different? Like anyone, well, any man, let's be clear, could participate. They weren't professional athletes. A lot of them were just regular people who happened to be fast or strong, or maybe just really competitive. There was no sponsorship, no million-dollar endorsements, no Nike, no protein shakes. They didn't even wear clothes. But here's the dark twist. If you were a woman, especially a married woman, and you dared to show up to watch these games, you could be punished by being thrown off a cliff. Literally. Like to your death. No warning, no discussion, just off the cliff you go. That was the moment I knew this was more than just a random thought. This was history, real, raw, kind of absurd, and honestly, deeply disturbing. It was the beginning of a much bigger story. A story about the dark, complicated, and often unfair world behind the most celebrated sporting event on the planet. And so, that's what we're talking about today. The truth behind the Olympics, not the glamour, not the medals, not the highlight reels. I want to take you all the way back to where it started, to the blood, the politics, the sexism, the racism, the greed, and the scandals that the Olympic Committee would rather you forget. Because history isn't just in textbooks. Sometimes it's hiding behind gold medals and national anthems, and sometimes it starts with a thought on the toilet. Let's get into it. Chapter 2: Naked Glory and Divine Competition. So where did the Olympics begin? I mean, we all know it's Greek, right? Ancient Greece statues, togas, philosophy. Lots of yelling in open arenas. But the truth, the origin of the Olympics is way weirder and a whole lot darker than just a bunch of guys running around in sandals. The first recorded Olympic Games happened in 776 BC. Yeah, that's over 2,700 years ago. Before modern medicine, before flush toilets, before sliced bread. Like way before. And even then the Greeks were out there running, wrestling, throwing things, and for some reason doing all of it butt naked. I'm serious. The athletes competed without clothes. It was called gymnos, which literally means naked in Greek. It's actually where the word gymnasium comes from. So the next time you're at the gym and you're struggling through your cardio, just remember it could be worse. You could be greased up and naked in front of an entire city. But here's the thing, the Olympics weren't just about physical strength or competition. They were about religion. These games were held to honor Zeus, king of the gods, the big guy in the sky. Think of it like a really intense birthday party. Except instead of cake, people ran foot races and fought each other for glory. There were no gold medals, no TV coverage, no sponsorships. If you won, you didn't get money. You got a crown made of olive leaves, and maybe your hometown would put up a statue of you. That was it, but the pride. The status that was everything. Because winning meant you were blessed by the gods. It meant Zeus himself had looked down and said, "That's my guy." And that kind of divine validation. It was a big deal. But what blew my mind the most, and I didn't learn this in school, by the way, is how dangerous it all was. The games were held during a time when Greece wasn't one big country. It was a bunch of rival city-states, Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and these places hated each other, like full-on war levels of hate. So every 4 years they would call a temporary truce just so athletes could travel safely to Olympia to compete. They called it the ekeicheria, which roughly translates to holding hands. It's kind of beautiful, right? Like, hey, we may be at each other's throats 364 days a year, but for the Olympics, we pause. But of course, someone always has to ruin it. There's this one story about Sparta. Of course, it's Sparta ignoring the truce and attacking a city on their way to the games. Just straight up rolled through, killed a bunch of people, and then showed up at the Olympics like nothing happened. Hey, we're here. What's up? The organizers were not impressed. They banned Sparta from the games and fined them a ton of money. And while that seems like a light punishment for, murdering people, it was actually humiliating. Sparta, the powerhouse of the Greek world, got told to sit out. That's like banning Tom Brady from the Super Bowl because he punched someone in the parking lot. After that, they had to write down the truce, like in writing, and hang it up on a bronze disc to remind everyone, no war during the games, people. Chill. And then there were the sports themselves. The original events were honestly kind of wild. There was the stadion, a short foot race, chariot racing, which was basically drag racing with horses on dirt roads, and my personal favorite, pankration. Pankration was like a brutal mix of boxing and wrestling with no rules. You could punch, kick, choke, dislocate joints. The only things off limits were biting and eye gouging. Which, thank you for drawing the line somewhere, I guess. And people died. That was part of the sport. Imagine watching your neighbor sign up for Olympic glory and then watching him get strangled to death in front of a crowd of thousands. And the winner. The winner was the one who didn't die. So, yeah. These games weren't just athletic. They were intense, violent, and deeply spiritual. And yet, despite all that, they were for regular people. That's what sticks with me the most. These competitors weren't famous. They weren't training full-time. They didn't have personal chefs or six-figure endorsements. Most of them were farmers, soldiers, tradesmen guys who just happened to be strong or fast or had something to prove. There's even a story about the first recorded Olympic champion, a guy named Koraibos. He was a cook, not a warrior, not a nobleman, a cook. And he won the very first stadion race, a foot race that made him a hero. All for running about 600 feet faster than the next guy. He didn't win a trophy. He didn't get 1 million followers on Instagram. He got an olive wreath, maybe an apple, and probably a sore foot. But that moment, his win was etched into history. Because back then, that's all it took. Just raw human ability. No training camp, no sponsor, no steroid scandal. So here's what I started to wonder. How did we get from that, from olive wreaths and regular people to billion-dollar events, endorsement deals, doping cover-ups, and athletes collapsing under mental pressure? Somewhere between naked foot races and primetime TV, something shifted. The Olympics became less about what the human body can do, and more about what it's worth, and that's where the story turns dark. because the more I dug into Olympic history, the more I saw this pattern of exclusion, of injustice, of people being erased, punished, forgotten, and always money lurking in the background. But that's coming up. Right now, we've barely scratched the surface. We've got racism, scandal, exploitation, politics, even international cover-ups. And trust me, it only gets messier from here. Let's keep going. Chapter 3. The Truce That Meant Nothing. Here's the thing about ancient Greece that people forget. It wasn't some united, peaceful land of philosophers and toga parties. It was a constant war zone full of rival city-states who couldn't agree on anything and were always one insult away from stabbing each other with spears. So when I learned that the Olympics somehow managed to bring all these enemies together without bloodshed, I was shocked. Every 4 years, the Greeks would declare what they called the ekecheiria, the Olympic truce. It literally meant holding hands, which sounds so sweet, right? Like, let's pause our wars, shake hands, and let our best men wrestle naked for glory. But humans being humans, someone always breaks the rules. And of course, that someone was Sparta. Now, if you've ever watched 300 or you just remember that one guy screaming, "This is Sparta," while kicking someone into a pit, you probably already know the Spartans weren't exactly the peace-loving type. Their whole brand was being tough, relentless, and, let's be honest, kind of scary. So get this, on their way to the Olympics, the Spartans decided it would be a great time to attack a rival city. Yeah. While everyone else was like, "Yay, let's celebrate peace and unity," Sparta was like, "Actually, let's murder some people." They broke the truce, marched through enemy territory, and ended up killing over 1,000 people. Just casually committed a war crime on their way to a sporting event, like it was just a pit stop. And then they had the audacity to show up at the Olympics like nothing happened, like they didn't just lead a massacre. "Hey guys, we're here for the games. Who's wrestling first?" I can't even imagine the vibe at the arena. Like everyone else is stretching, getting ready, and then Sparta walks in covered in blood. It's wild. Naturally, this didn't go over well. The Olympic officials, who at the time were probably local priests or respected elders, were furious. They banned Sparta from participating that year and fined them a huge sum of money. And sure, if we're looking at it from a modern legal perspective, that punishment doesn't really fit the crime. I mean, killing 1,000 people and getting disqualified from foot races, that feels light. But in ancient Greece, this was a massive humiliation. The Spartans lived for honor and war. Being banned from honoring Zeus at the Olympics, that was like being excommunicated from godhood. Of course, Sparta tried to downplay it, made excuses, acted like it was just a misunderstanding. Oops. Sorry, we thought the truce started tomorrow, but no one was buying it. This whole scandal forced the Greeks to take the truce more seriously. From then on, they engraved the peace agreement on a bronze disc and displayed it near the Olympic grounds, a big shiny reminder to everyone, don't kill each other on the way here. What stuck with me the most about this story wasn't just the violence, although, yes, that's pretty horrifying. It was how fragile peace really was, even when people were gathered to do something as pure and supposedly unifying as sport. Because even back then, war and ego and politics always found a way in. And isn't that still kind of true? The Olympics are supposed to be about unity, about nations coming together. But behind the scenes then and now, there's always power, always pride, always someone willing to break the rules if it means winning. And the people who pay the price, usually not the ones in charge. We're just getting started. The next part of the story, it's about the people who didn't even get a chance to play simply because of who they were. Let's talk about the women. Chapter 4. The Cliff Women were pushed from okay. So we've talked about the athletes, the wars, the naked wrestling, and how in ancient Greece the Olympics were this massive celebration of human strength and divine devotion. But let's pause for a second and ask who exactly got to celebrate. Because while men were out there running races, throwing javelins, and being crowned with olive leaves, women, well, they weren't even allowed in the stadium. Not as athletes, not as spectators, not even as silent supporters. In fact, if you were a woman, and especially if you were married, and you dared to step foot inside the Olympic grounds, The punishment was clear and brutal death. Not symbolic death, not a fine, not public shaming. Actual physical death. They would throw you off a cliff. Yeah, you heard me. A literal cliff. Let that sink in for a second. A woman, someone's wife, mother, sister, could be dragged out of the crowd and pushed off a ledge for watching a foot race, all because she had the audacity to be present. And this wasn't just some one-off law that rarely got enforced. It was written, spoken, accepted. Part of the culture, a rule no one questioned because women weren't even considered part of the conversation. The logic behind it, if we can even call it logic, was that the games were sacred. They were meant for men to honor the gods with their physical bodies. Women, according to them, were a distraction, a threat, something impure in the presence of male athleticism and divine ritual. So what was the solution strip? The men naked grease them up and kill any woman who dared to peek. I know, it's insane. And yet, it happened. There's this documented case of a woman named Kalipatira. She was the daughter of an Olympic champion, the sister of another, and the mother of yet another athlete. This woman came from a whole lineage of sports legends. But because she was a woman, she wasn't allowed to attend. Still, she disguised herself as a man just to see her son compete. She wore men's clothes and kept her head down. But when her son won, she got so excited that she ran to the field to hug him, and that's when her disguise fell apart. Her robe came loose. Her secret was out. The officials were shocked, angry. But here's the twist: they didn't kill her. Why? Because of her family. Her bloodline of champions earned her a rare pardon. But they quickly changed the rules. After that, from then on, even male coaches had to be naked just to ensure no woman would ever sneak in again. Think about how absurd that is. Their response to one woman witnessing a competition was to demand that everyone be naked, just to keep women out. But what's not absurd, what's actually horrifying, is the message underneath all of this. That women's presence wasn't just unwanted. It was dangerous. That their existence, their eyes, their attention was something to be feared and punished. And that part, that doesn't feel ancient. That feels familiar. Because how many times even now are women still told, "You don't belong here"? How many careers, opportunities, and lives have been destroyed not because of incompetence, but because of gender? The Olympic Games in their earliest form celebrated the very best of what humans could physically achieve. But that definition of human excluded half the population. Women weren't seen as equals or competitors or even individuals. They were liabilities. And for centuries, their stories were left out. Their names were erased, their presence criminalized. So the next time we watch a woman win gold in gymnastics or sprint across a finish line to the roar of a stadium, we need to remember how long it took to get here, and how many women were silenced or pushed off cliffs just for trying to watch. The Olympics were never neutral. Not then and not now. Every arena has its gatekeepers, and those gatekeepers, they decide who gets to run and who gets erased before the race even starts. But history has a funny way of surfacing the truth, even when it's been buried under centuries of olive wreaths and patriotic pageantry. So let's keep digging. Chapter 5. The Gold That Was Taken. When we talk about Olympic legends, there's one name that should be in every history book, every classroom, every conversation about greatness: Jim Thorpe. But the sad thing is, for a long time he wasn't. He was erased. And the reason why, well, it says a lot about who we choose to celebrate and who we try to forget. Jim Thorpe was born in 1888 in what's now Oklahoma. He was part of the Sac and Fox Nation, an indigenous tribe with a deep spiritual and cultural history. And growing up, Jim didn't have much. His early life was filled with loss. His twin brother died when they were just 9. Then both of his parents passed away before he reached adulthood. And yet somehow through all that grief, all that instability, Jim found a kind of freedom in sports. He wasn't just good, he was extraordinary. He ran like the wind. He was graceful and powerful and fast, and he had this natural connection to movement, like his body just knew what to do. He played everything: football, baseball, track, and field. And he didn't just play, he dominated. By 1912, Jim had qualified to compete at the Stockholm Olympics, and even then, no one really expected what he was about to do. Jim entered two of the most demanding events in the Games, the pentathlon and the decathlon. That's not one sport. That's 10. 10 completely different events. Running, jumping, throwing, everything. Most people trained their whole lives just to master one of those. Jim did all of them, and he made it look effortless. But here's the part that really gets me. Right before one of his events, someone stole his shoes. Like, literally stole them. Out of his bag. He had nothing to wear. So what did he do? He found a pair of mismatched shoes. One he borrowed from a teammate, and the other he pulled out of a trash bin. One of them was the wrong size, so he stuffed it with a sock just to make it fit. And he still won. Not just once, twice. Jim Thorpe won 2 Olympic gold medals in shoes that didn't match after losing his family after being doubted by everyone who thought someone like him didn't belong on the world stage. The King of Sweden even told him, "Sir, you are the greatest athlete in the world." And he was. But the world, especially America, wasn't ready to see an indigenous man as a hero. Just months after his Olympic victory, a newspaper published a story claiming that Jim had once played semi-professional baseball for a small paycheck, a tiny amount of money. And that was enough to ruin everything. Because back then, Olympic athletes were required to be amateurs, no pay, no contracts. If you ever made money playing any sport, no matter how small or how long ago, you were considered tainted. So the Olympic Committee, the same people who cheered his name, held ceremonies in his honor, turned around and stripped him of both medals. No hearing, no appeal, just gone. They erased him from the record books as if he had never been there. And look, let's be honest, it wasn't just about the rules. There were plenty of other athletes in that era who had quietly taken money or played minor league sports, but they weren't indigenous. They weren't Jim Thorpe. He became a symbol not of pride, but of punishment. They didn't want someone like him representing the ideal athlete, so they used a technicality to push him out. It broke him, not just professionally, but emotionally. He tried to keep going. He played pro football, some baseball, even acted in a few films. But the glory, the thing that should have been his legacy, had been stolen. And the media, they weren't kind. Every article reduced him to the Indian athlete. That's how they referred to him. Never just Olympian or champion, always Indian. Like his identity was a warning label. He struggled with alcoholism later in life. He lost jobs. He moved from place to place. And when he died in 1953, he wasn't buried in his homeland. He was buried in a small town in Pennsylvania that literally renamed itself Jim Thorpe to claim his legacy. Which is kind of sweet, but also strange. Like, this man was denied honor for decades, and now he's a tourist attraction. Anyway, that might have been the end of the story if it weren't for his children. For decades, Jim Thorpe's family fought to have his Olympic records restored. They gathered documents, they appealed, they petitioned the IOC over and over, and time after time, the committee refused. Until finally, in 2022, 110 years after his gold medals were stripped, the International Olympic Committee reinstated Jim Thorpe as the sole winner of the pentathlon and decathlon in 1912. The man who had been erased was finally officially acknowledged. And I wish I could say it felt like justice. But honestly, it felt late. Too late. Because Jim never got to hold those medals again. He never got to hear the crowd cheer for him the way they should have. He never got to see his name restored to its rightful place in history. And I think about that a lot, how quickly a system can take something away from someone. How easy it is to ruin a life with a headline. And how long it takes to make it right. If it ever gets made right at all. Jim Thorpe should have been a legend from the very beginning. Instead, he became a cautionary tale about race pride politics and the price of being too good when you're not who they expected. But we remember now, and we say his name. Jim Thorpe, gold medalist, Olympic champion, the greatest athlete in the world. Chapter 6. The fastest man in a world that wanted him. Last, some names just stick with you, and for me, one of those names is Jesse Owens. You might have heard of him, the black American sprinter who embarrassed Hitler at the 1936 Olympics. That's the version most people know. It's clean, it's heroic, it fits nicely on a poster. But the real story of Jesse Owens, it's so much deeper, more painful, more honest, and honestly way more important. Let's back up for a second. It's 1936. The Olympics are being held in Berlin, Nazi Germany. Hitler is in power. And this isn't just a sporting event, this is a propaganda show. Hitler wants to prove that Germany and the so-called Aryan race is superior to the rest of the world. He's got flags everywhere, stadiums full of people, choreographed parades. It's like the world's biggest lie dressed up as national pride. And then Jesse Owens shows up, a black man from Cleveland, Ohio, the son of a sharecropper, the grandson of enslaved people. He wasn't just poor, he grew up in extreme poverty. He picked cotton as a kid. He ran barefoot because his family couldn't afford shoes. But he had speed, like supernatural speed. Coaches said he moved like a gust of wind, effortless, untouchable. By the time the 1936 Olympics rolled around, Jesse was already breaking world records in college. But what he was about to do in Berlin, no one could have predicted. He won 4 gold medals: the 100 meters, the 200 meters, the long jump, and the 4-hour 100-meter relay. Each time he crossed the finish line or landed a perfect jump, it wasn't just a win, it was a slap in the face to Hitler's entire ideology. A black man standing tall, triumphant, and indisputably the best athlete in the world in Hitler's backyard, in front of 100,000 German spectators, on the global stage. And yet, despite what so many people say, Hitler wasn't the only one who snubbed Jesse. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, the leader of the so-called free world, never even sent him a telegram. No invite to the White House, no handshake, no parade in his honor, because in 1936, America still had segregated bathrooms, segregated schools, segregated lives. Jesse wasn't a hero back home. He was a symbol of something America didn't want to face, that greatness, that brilliance, that power could come from someone they considered less than. When Jesse returned home from Berlin, he had to enter hotels through the service door. He had to sit in the back of the bus. He couldn't eat at certain restaurants. And the most heartbreaking part, to make money after the Olympics. Jesse Owens, the fastest man on earth, was forced to race horses for entertainment. Yeah, horses. He'd line up on a track with a thoroughbred, and the crowd would cheer as he beat the animal to the finish line. It wasn't sport, it was spectacle. It was humiliation dressed up as applause. He tried to start a business. He tried to stay in the spotlight. But the country that used him to claim moral superiority over Hitler had no real place for him after the cameras turned off. And I think about that a lot. How the narrative we're told is so often incomplete. How we love the moment of glory, the image of Jesse Owens standing on the podium, medals, shining defiance in his eyes. But we skip the part where he had to hustle side gigs to feed his family, the part where he was forgotten. Jesse Owens didn't get rich from those medals. He didn't get elevated to a seat at the table. He got used, cheered briefly, and then quietly erased when the country didn't need him anymore. It wasn't until decades later that he started to receive some of the recognition he deserved. In 1976, President Gerald Ford finally awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. That was 40 years after Berlin. 40 years. By then, Jesse had already suffered through lung cancer. He'd been pushed into obscurity, pulled into financial hardship, and had watched the world move on. He died in 1980. And I wonder if he were alive today, what would he think of how we remember him? Would he smile at the documentaries, the museum exhibits, the highlights they showed during the Olympics? Or would he remember the loneliness of being the best and still being treated like he was invisible? What Jesse Owens did in 1936 wasn't just a win for America. It was a moment of global defiance, a reminder that talent, excellence, and strength don't come from skin color. They come from grit, from sacrifice, from soul. But his story, like Jim Thorpe's, reminds us that medals don't erase injustice, that being great doesn't always mean being protected, and that even when the world is watching, the truth can still be buried under flags and fireworks. But that's why we tell these stories. Not to rewrite history, but to complete it. Because behind every Olympic podium, there's a person. And sometimes the real victory isn't the medal, it's surviving the silence that comes after. Chapter 7: The Politics Behind the Podium. You know, when I was younger, I used to think the Olympics were the purest form of competition. Like no politics, no corruption, just the best athletes in the world coming together in peace. That was the dream, right? But the more I learned, the more I realized that behind the gold medals, the torch, the flags, there's something darker, something that doesn't get broadcast during the opening ceremony. The Olympics have never been just about sports. They've always been political. Always. I mean, just look at where they're held. Cities spend billions to host the games, often going into massive debt, displacing entire communities, and promising things like economic growth and global exposure that rarely ever materialize. And who decides where the games go? The International Olympic Committee, the IOC, this elite, mostly unelected group of people who operate like a private club, and for decades have been plagued with allegations of bribery, corruption, and shady backdoor deals. It's kind of ironic. The Olympics are supposed to celebrate integrity and excellence, but the system running it, not exactly squeaky clean. Take the Salt Lake City scandal from the late 1990s. Back then, Salt Lake City was trying to win the bid to host the 2002 Winter Olympics, and they did, but only after investigators discovered that members of the IOC had accepted over $1 million in bribes. We're talking gifts, scholarships for their kids, free medical care, even plastic surgery. That's right. Olympic officials were allegedly accepting nose jobs in exchange for votes. It blew up into a massive scandal, and to save face, the IOC expelled several members and promised reforms. But the damage was done. The world had seen the cracks. And it wasn't just about bribery. Over time, it became clear that the Games had become a political chessboard, a place where countries didn't just send athletes, they sent messages. I think one of the most chilling examples of this was the 1972 Munich Olympics. That year, the Games were supposed to be a symbol of peace, a chance for Germany to show the world it had moved on from its Nazi past. Everything was designed to feel friendly, modern, safe. But then, it happened. On September 5th, 8 members of a Palestinian militant group known as Black September broke into the Olympic Village. They took 11 Israeli athletes and coaches hostage. What followed was one of the most horrific and tragic events in Olympic history. The whole world watched in shock as negotiations dragged on for hours. Then a botched rescue attempt at the airport left every single hostage dead. And do you know what the IOC did? They paused the games for one day, just one. Then they carried on. They called it a tribute to the fallen, but it felt hollow. Like the games were too big to stop. Like those lives, those murdered athletes were a tragic inconvenience. To this day, the families of the victims say the IOC has never properly acknowledged what happened. That really shook me. Because it made me realize that the Olympics aren't just vulnerable to politics. They're often built on politics. And sometimes those politics bleed into performance. Let's talk about doping. When you think of Olympic doping scandals, your mind probably goes straight to Russia. The state-sponsored doping program, uncovered after the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics, was one of the biggest athletic frauds in modern history. Russian officials literally tampered with urine samples, swapped out test tubes in the middle of the night, and built a system to help their athletes cheat systematically while still passing drug tests. Over 1,000 athletes were implicated across 30 sports. Think about that. That's not just one rogue coach or athlete cutting corners. That's a whole government deciding to rewrite biology in order to win. And what did the IOC do? They banned the country, sure, but then they let the athletes compete under a neutral flag. They couldn't wear Russian colors or sing the anthem, but they were still there, still competing, still winning medals. So, what was the consequence really? It sent a message that if you're powerful enough, rich enough, and win enough, you'll still get a seat at the table. And this isn't just a Russian issue. Doping has plagued the Olympics for decades, from East Germany's steroid program in the 70s and 80s to individual scandals involving American, British, Chinese, and Jamaican athletes. The pressure to be superhuman has pushed so many to cheat. And I get it. The Olympics are brutal. You train your entire life for a moment that lasts maybe 10 seconds. If you win, you're immortalized. If you lose, you're forgotten. That kind of pressure, it breaks people. So when the stakes are that high, and the people at the top are willing to look the other way, what's to stop someone from doing whatever it takes? But it's not just the athletes who suffer, it's the fans, the kids watching at home, the families who believed in something pure only to find out it was rigged. And maybe that's what hits the hardest. Because we want the Olympics to be better. We need them to be better. We want to believe that there's still a space where the best rise to the top, not because they're rich or politically favored, but because they're good. But behind the medals, the national anthems, the tears of joy, there's a machine. And it's been running on money, power, and politics for a very long time. In the next chapter, I want to talk about who pays the price when that machine rolls into town and why the Olympic dream has become a nightmare for so many everyday people. Let's talk about displacement. Chapter 8. The Price of the Podium. You know what no one tells you about the Olympics, that before a single medal is won, someone almost always loses their home. It's something I didn't think about for years. Like most people, I was too focused on the torch, the music, the uniforms. I never stopped to ask what was here before the stadiums, who had to move to make room for the games. And once I started digging, I couldn't stop. Because the truth is, behind every shining Olympic village, there's often a trail of forced evictions, demolished homes, and broken communities. Let me take you back to Beijing 2008. China hosted the Summer Olympics that year, and the world was blown away by the scale. The Bird's Nest Stadium, the fireworks, the flawless opening ceremony. It looked like a country announcing itself on the global stage. But what we didn't see was that according to human rights organizations, over 5 million people were forcibly evicted from their homes in preparation for those games. 1.5 million. Entire neighborhoods bulldozed. Families given little to no notice. Compensation often minimal, if any. Protests silenced. Dissenters were sometimes harassed, jailed, or simply disappeared. All so that the streets could be wide, the skyline clean, and the cameras focused only on the new China. And this isn't just a China problem. This has happened over and over again all around the world. In Rio de Janeiro, for the 2016 Olympics, over 77,000 people were displaced. Most of them came from favela's tight-knit working-class communities. The government said the demolitions were necessary for infrastructure. But let's be honest, the goal was to beautify the city for tourists and international media. And guess what replaced many of those destroyed neighborhoods? Parking lots, shopping centers, empty buildings. Places designed not for locals, but for visitors who would be gone in 2 weeks. One story that stuck with me came from a woman in Villa Autodromo, a small community near Rio's Olympic Park. She said she lived there for over 20 years, raised her kids there, built her house brick by brick, and one day the government just showed up, told her she had to leave. No appeal, no discussion, just Olympics are coming. She refused. She became one of the last holdouts, a symbol of resistance. And even as bulldozers flattened the homes around her, she stayed. Eventually, her house was torn down too, and the Olympics, they came and went. But her life, her roots, her memories, her sense of home, those were gone forever. I wish I could say this was rare, but it's not. Whether it's Seoul in 1988, Atlanta in 1996, Athens in 2004, the pattern is the same. The poorest and most vulnerable are always the first to be pushed aside. They're rarely consulted. Their stories don't make the headlines. And it's not just homes that are lost. Sometimes it's entire ways of life. In Tokyo, for the 2020 Olympics, homeless people were removed from parks and public spaces, not given housing, just moved. Out of sight, out of mind, because God forbid a tourist sees poverty near a stadium. This obsession with image, with perfection, has consequences. Real human consequences. The Olympics are marketed as a celebration of humanity. But when I look at the displacement, the debt, the militarized policing, and the silencing of voices, it starts to feel more like a spectacle built on silence. And the worst part, it almost always happens in the name of legacy. Cities promise that the Games will leave behind better infrastructure, more tourism, global prestige. But study after study shows that most host cities don't benefit in the long term. They're left with debt, underused stadiums, and traumatized communities. And the people who were forced out, they're never invited back. There's something deeply wrong with that, because the Olympics should be about unity, about lifting people up, not bulldozing their lives for a 2-week photo op. And I know some people say, well, that's just the cost of progress, or it's worth it for national pride. But I can't help but ask pride for who, because it's not pride when you have to evict the poor to impress the powerful. It's not progress when it erases the most vulnerable among us. And it's not justice when we only celebrate the podium and ignore the people buried beneath it. So the next time you watch the Games and you see the bright lights and the perfect streets and the smiling mascots, I want you to wonder what was here before. And more importantly, who paid the price, because the Olympic flame may burn bright, but too often it's lit by the lives it leaves in the dark. Chapter 9. The Hidden Pain Behind the Glory. You ever notice how Olympians are always smiling? They're waving to the crowd, biting their medals, standing tall on podiums. And we cheer, we cry, we call them heroes. But what we don't see, what we rarely talk about, is the pain that comes after the applause fades. Or worse, the pain they carried while they were performing. Because behind every perfect routine, every race, every score, there's pressure. Unimaginable pressure. And in so many cases, there's trauma. The Olympics are built on the idea that we're watching the best of the best, but what that really means is we're watching people who've sacrificed everything. Their childhoods, their mental health, sometimes even their safety. And the more I learned about what some of these athletes have gone through, the harder it became to watch the Games with the same eyes. Take Simone Biles, for example, the most decorated gymnast of all time, a powerhouse, a legend. But in Tokyo 2020, something unexpected happened. In the middle of the competition, Simone withdrew from several events. She later explained that she was suffering from what gymnasts call the twisties, a mental block, where your brain and body disconnect midair. It sounds harmless, but it's terrifying. Imagine launching yourself into the air at full speed, flipping and twisting, and midway your brain just blanks. You lose track of where you are, which way is up, how to land. It's not just mental, it's life-threatening. And when Simone chose to step back, not just to protect her body, but her mind, the world had mixed reactions. Some called her brave, others accused her of being weak, said she quit on her country. But what they didn't understand, or maybe didn't want to, is that she'd been carrying trauma for years. Simone Biles is one of the hundreds of athletes who survived Larry Nassar, the former USA gymnastics doctor, who sexually abused young gymnasts under the guise of medical treatment for years. And people in power knew. They ignored it, covered it up, protected the system instead of the girls. Simone has spoken about how the very institution that was supposed to protect her failed her over and over again. So when she stepped away in 2020, it wasn't just about mental blocks. It was about reclaiming ownership of her body, of her story, after years of being used and exploited. And the sad truth is, she's not alone. In recent years, we've heard more and more athletes speak out, not just about physical injuries, but about abuse, gaslighting, depression, and anxiety. And it makes you realize for every gold medal we see, there's a human being underneath it. Sometimes breaking. Like Michael Phelps, the most decorated Olympian in history. You'd think someone with 23 gold medals would be immune to sadness, right? But after retiring from competition, Michael opened up about his battle with depression. He said there were times he didn't want to be alive. That after the Olympics, the crash, that loss of structure, identity, purpose was devastating. He even checked into rehab after the 2014 Games following a DUI arrest. And what struck me most was how honest he was about it. How he said, "I thought of myself as just a swimmer." That was it. So when swimming was over, I didn't know who I was anymore. That hit me, because that's what the system does. It molds these athletes into machines. And once the medals are won, once the cameras stop rolling, they're left with silence. And sometimes that silence is deafening. And then there's the physical abuse, the relentless training, the body shaming, the coaches who scream, who withhold food, who push children until they collapse. In figure skating, there have been multiple reports of young girls being trained through injuries, punished for gaining weight, even encouraged to take diuretics or starve themselves before competitions. In boxing, swimming, track, and field, it's the same story over and over. Perform, obey, don't complain, and God forbid you speak out. Because once you do, the system often turns on you, calls you difficult, ungrateful, disgraced. They build you up into a hero until you stop winning, or start telling the truth. Then they drop you. It makes me wonder how many of the athletes we celebrate today are quietly suffering, how many are smiling on the podium, but crying alone in hotel rooms. How many will be forgotten once the flame goes out? The Olympics were supposed to be a celebration of human potential, but sometimes they feel more like a machine that eats people. And I don't say that to diminish the athletes, I say it to honor them, to see them as more than medals, to recognize the strength it takes not just to compete, but to survive a system that often treats them as disposable. Mental health isn't weakness. Choosing to step back to say, I'm not okay, that takes more courage than any vault or marathon. And as fans, as people who love sport, who love greatness, I think we have a responsibility. Not just to cheer in the good moments, but to listen in the quiet ones. To care about the human being after the games end. Because glory is fleeting. But pain, when ignored, can last a lifetime. Chapter 10. Selling gold. The money behind the medals. You ever look at the Olympics and think, this can't just be about sports anymore, because these days it feels less like a celebration of athletic greatness and more like a global marketing event dressed up as inspiration. Logos on everything, commercials disguised as documentaries, corporations sponsoring entire countries. Every medal, every podium, every broadcast, there's a brand attached to it. And it's not just subtle, it's everywhere. You can't watch a gymnast stick a landing or a runner cross the finish line without being told to drink this energy drink, wear these shoes, buy this insurance, fly with this airline, or eat these fries. And I get it. Money makes the games possible. Broadcasting rights, stadiums, transportation, security, it all costs billions. But here's what really gets to me. Where does all that money actually go? Let's break it down. In 2021, during the Tokyo Olympics, NBC paid over $1.2 billion just for the U.S. broadcasting rights. Companies like Coca-Cola, Visa, Samsung, Airbnb, and dozens of others poured in hundreds of millions as official sponsors. The International Olympic Committee, the IOC, made more than $7.6 billion in revenue between 2017 and 2021 alone. That's billion, with a B. But here's the kicker, most Olympic athletes don't see a dime of that. In fact, many athletes, even those who compete for their country on the world's biggest stage, live below the poverty line. Some work part-time jobs just to survive while training 40-plus hours a week. Some rely on GoFundMe campaigns to pay for travel coaching or even basic health care. It's the ultimate contradiction. The world sees them as national heroes. But in reality, they're often broke. I remember reading about Noah Lyles, a world champion sprinter from the US. In one interview, he said that if you don't have a sponsorship, you're basically on your own. Even Olympians sometimes have to choose between paying rent or buying better gear. And then there's Simone Manuel, a gold medal-winning swimmer, who once talked openly about the pressure to not just win, but to remain marketable. She's a Black woman in a sport that's overwhelmingly white, and she spoke about how the sponsorship world was not built for people like her. It made me think about how much the system is built on appearances, not just performance. If you're photogenic, if you're the right kind of marketable, if you're media-friendly, you might get a big deal. But if you're not, if you're quiet or complicated, or from a small country with little corporate interest, good luck. And here's something even more disturbing. Athletes don't own their own image at the Olympics. The IOC has strict rules, especially something called Rule 40, which basically prohibits athletes from promoting any personal sponsors during the games. So if you're an athlete with a small brand helping fund your training, too bad. You can't thank them. You can't wear their logo. You can't even mention them during the Olympics. Meanwhile, the IOC and its official partners get total control over the spotlight. It's like this: they use the athletes to sell the show, but the profits, they don't go to the people putting their bodies on the line. And that's what's so hard to stomach. These athletes dedicate their lives to a dream. They push themselves past the limits of what most of us can even imagine. They represent their nations, inspire the world, and often risk long-term damage to their bodies. But when the lights fade, when the sponsors move on to the next fresh face, many are left behind. There's a quote that stuck with me from Carrie Walsh Jennings, a 3-time Olympic gold medalist in beach volleyball. She once said, "When you're winning, everyone wants to be around you. When you stop, it gets quiet. Fast. It's like once you're no longer profitable, you disappear." And this isn't just an American issue. Around the world, it's the same. In many countries, athletes have no health insurance, no pensions, no mental health support, no protections if they get injured. One bad fall, one missed qualification, and years of sacrifice can evaporate overnight. All while the IOC continues to rake in billions. And don't get me wrong, there are success stories. The golden children who land million-dollar deals, the household names who build empires. But they are the exception, not the rule. For every Usain Bolt, there are hundreds of athletes whose names we'll never know, who trained just as hard, sacrificed just as much, and got nothing but a fading memory and an unpaid bill. So when I see those sleek commercials, the ones set to emotional music with lines like "Believe in greatness" or "Inspire the world," I can't help but feel a little sick. Because believing in greatness is easy. Funding it, protecting it, respecting it, that's the hard part. And right now, the system is built to celebrate gold, but ignore the people who gave everything to earn it. I think about this a lot. What would the Olympics look like if the athletes actually owned their moment? If the billions of dollars went not just into buildings and branding, but into real support, real pay, real care? Maybe then the flame would mean something more. Not just a symbol of competition, but of fairness, of dignity, of justice. Chapter 11. The Silence Beneath the Spotlight. The Olympics love a good redemption arc, a comeback story, a standing ovation, a photo finish. But what the Olympics don't love, what the system behind the games has never been good at accountability. For all the talk about honor, excellence, and integrity, the Olympic world has a long history of looking the other way, especially when scandals get too close to the core. And I wish I could say it was just a few bad apples, a few unfortunate incidents, but it's not. It's a pattern, a culture of silence that protects the powerful and buries the rest. Let's go back again to the case of Larry Nassar. I know we talked about him earlier, but what haunts me the most isn't just what he did, it's how long he got away with it. For more than 2 decades, Larry Nassar abused hundreds of young gymnasts, some as young as 6 years old, under the guise of medical treatment. He did this while working with USA Gymnastics, while affiliated with Michigan State University, and yes, while attending the Olympics with Team USA. And here's the worst part people knew. There were reports, complaints, whispers, red flags, but the institutions that should have protected those girls, they did nothing. Or worse, they protected him. USA Gymnastics didn't report him to law enforcement when the first complaints surfaced. They launched quiet internal investigations. They delayed. They minimized. They let him stay close to young girls for months, for years. Why? Because he was successful, trusted. He got results. He was part of the system. And the system hates disruption more than it hates injustice. It wasn't until 2016, after years of silence, that survivors like Rachel Denhollander, Ailey Raisman, Michaela Maroney, and Simone Biles began to speak out one by one. And when they did, they weren't met with immediate support. They were questioned, blamed, pushed to relive their trauma in public just to be believed. Let that sink in. Olympians, literal national heroes, had to fight to be heard, and this wasn't an isolated case. There's a long list of Olympic scandals that were quietly covered up or dismissed until someone forced the truth out. Think about East Germany in the 1970s and 80s. They built a state-sponsored doping machine so big, so aggressive that teenage girls were unknowingly given anabolic steroids disguised as vitamins. Many of those girls later developed severe health problems, organ damage, infertility, mental health issues. Some died young. But for decades, the IOC didn't say a word. Even as records were shattered, even as whispers spread, the medals were celebrated, and the victims were forgotten. Why? Because East Germany's rise added drama to the Games. It was good for the narrative, the Cold War rivalry, the suspense. Truth wasn't the priority. The show was. Or take the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City, where two Black American athletes, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, raised their fists on the podium in a gesture of Black power and civil rights. It was silent, peaceful, powerful, and the IOC, they punished them. Called the gesture a domestic political statement and banned them from the Olympic Village. They were vilified, labeled unpatriotic. Their careers fell apart. Meanwhile, white athletes who made controversial or hateful statements quietly shielded, forgotten. So let's be honest. The Olympics don't mind controversy as long as it doesn't threaten the brand. Athletes who speak out about racism, abuse, exploitation politics are seen as distractions, disruptions, problems, and the institutions respond not with reform, but with damage control. I think of Peng Shuai, the Chinese tennis player, who in 2021 accused a high-ranking Chinese official of sexual assault. Shortly after her post went viral, she vanished, disappeared from public view. Her social media erased, the world worried, demanded answers. And during the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics, when reporters asked the IOC about her disappearance, what did they do? They dodged. Said she was safe. Even staged a bizarre video call with her that felt more like a hostage tape than a reassurance. They didn't challenge the Chinese government. They didn't demand transparency, because Beijing was hosting, and protecting the relationship mattered more than protecting her. That's the pattern. Over and over, the IOC has chosen alliances over accountability, profits over people, silence over truth. And I get it, the Olympics are complicated. They're a global operation. Politics are everywhere. But when you brand yourself as the highest expression of human excellence, you owe the world more than PR statements. You owe us honesty. You owe the athletes protection. You owe the survivors justice. Because these aren't just scandals, they're stories of pain, of people who were betrayed by the very institutions that promised to lift them up. And until we confront that, the Olympic flame will always burn with a shadow. The medals will shine, but the silence will scream louder. Chapter 12. Rewriting the Flame. After everything I've uncovered, I can't watch the Olympics the same way anymore. And trust me, I've tried. I've sat in front of the screen cheering like I used to, trying to lose myself in the thrill, the pageantry, the elegance of it all. But there's always a voice in the back of my head now, reminding me of what I know, the broken promises, the silenced victims, the communities erased, the athletes discarded. And I keep coming back to the same question, does it have to be this way? Because the Olympics were never supposed to be about power or politics or billion-dollar deals. At their core, they were meant to be about people, about unity, about pushing the limits of what humans can achieve together. But somewhere along the way, that vision got hijacked. The ideals remained on paper, but the execution became something else entirely. And maybe that's where we start, by admitting that the system is broken. It's bloated, exploitative, and often abusive, not just to athletes, but to workers, to host cities, to the very spirit of fair competition. And yet I still believe something better is possible. What if the Olympics weren't about who could spend the most, or who could control the narrative, or who could profit the fastest? What if we stripped it all back? What if we chose one permanent location for the Games, so that we no longer had to displace communities every 4 years? A place designed to be sustainable, ethical, and inclusive, not a flashy showpiece to be abandoned after the closing ceremony. Imagine the billions of dollars that could be saved. Imagine the trauma that could be avoided. Or better yet, what if we shared the Games, rotated them through multiple cities, using existing infrastructure, reducing environmental damage, cutting costs, and making it less about glory and more about community. And what if we restructured the way we treat athletes, not as temporary heroes, but as long-term professionals, deserving of healthcare, mental health support, and real compensation? What if they had equity in their image, the right to represent their own sponsors, to speak their truth, to be more than silent symbols? Because right now the system uses them up and throws them away. But what if it didn't? What if we centered the games not around medals, but around values, transparency, justice, safety, fairness? Because I'll be honest with you, when I look at what the Olympics have become, I don't see tradition. I see a machine, a spectacle that feeds on pain while selling us inspiration. But inspiration built on silence, on injustice. That's not legacy. That's a lie. And maybe for once, the best way to honor the Olympic spirit isn't to light the torch again. Maybe it's to rebuild the fire from the ground up, to listen to survivors, to hold institutions accountable, to protect the next generation before they're harmed in the name of greatness. Because the truth is, greatness shouldn't hurt this much. And the price of glory should never be someone's body, or home, or mental health, or silence. We're better than this. We have to be. I don't want to cancel the Olympics. I want to redeem them. I want to see a games where every child watching feels safe to dream because they know the system has changed. I want to cheer for athletes without wondering what they've been through just to stand on that stage. And most of all, I want the flame to mean something again. Not just the start of a ceremony, but the spark of justice, of reform, of truth. Because maybe then, and only then, the Olympics could live up to what they were meant to be all along, a celebration not of perfection, but of humanity. We cheer for the heroes, we celebrate the records, but too often we forget the cost. The truth is, the Olympics, for all their beauty, have left behind a trail of broken promises and unheard voices. The question now is not whether we can ignore it, but whether we choose to see it, to listen, to care, and maybe to change. Because justice doesn't end with a medal ceremony. It begins with telling the full story. Thank you for watching True Crime Echoes. If this story moved you, if it made you think, share it. Let the truth echo further than the silence ever could.